nothing I can say to a room full of police officers that's going to convince them that you have nothing to do with this.
I know.
You know what they think.
I know it, all that, yeah.
Here's a guy who didn't call 911, who woke his wife up at a ridiculous hour because he was so guilty about something that he had to get it off his chest and say, I don't love you anymore, I'm leaving you. That didn't go well. Okay, so what happened?
She told me she wanted me to wake her up before I left. That's why I didn't just wake her up, like, just to tell her this. Like, I woke her up. That's what she wanted to do, and we talked. Like, usually at 4 a.m. I wake up, I go down and work out. This day, I wanted to talk to her about this. I love these girls. I love these girls so much. And this picture right here, Celeste and Bella, those are my life. I helped make those kids. There's nothing in my life that means more to me than these kids. Nothing. Kids, that's your life. That's your lifeline. That's everything. Like, you make kids, they come first before anything. Kids, spouse, family. That's what it's always been.
Nothing you've told me tonight makes sense. Nothing you've told me tonight feels like the truth. Can we start over?
Sure.
Tonight's been pretty intense, I can imagine. How are you feeling?
I slept like 2 hours last night, so I'm like running on empty right now. But
I know, I can see it. So why don't I do this? I'm sure you don't mind if we take a break for the night. And I'm sure that you are feeling some of the pressure from me. Okay? I'm going to commit to you that we're not going to stop working until we find them.
Okay.
Okay? And I want to commit to you that there is going to come a time when you're going to feel this pressure from other people. I'm not the only one who thinks that there's a possibility you have something to do with this.
Like another FBI agent, like pressure, or like just like
everyone.
Okay.
Everyone, Chris.
Okay.
The interrogator is clearly receptive to Chris's anxiety and endeavors to amplify this emotion before ending the interview. He wants to inflate Chris's apprehension as much as possible for the looming polygraph test that approaches the following day.
Tonight when you go home, one of two things is going to happen. You're going to pass out because you're so tired, okay? And that's probably not going to be what happens. Your head's going to go race, okay? So tonight when you lay down and your head starts racing, there's going to be things that come to your mind, okay? This always happens, always. It's very natural. You're going to say, I wonder why he asked me that, okay? You're going to say, screw him, how dare he accuse me?
It was 5:17 a.m., Monday, August 13th, 2018, in Frederick, Colorado. The air was still and dry, carrying the faint hum of crickets beneath a fading sky. Sprinklers hissed across lawns, and the neighborhood remained untouched by noise or movement. To anyone driving by, everything looked perfectly ordinary: porches with flower pots, curtains drawn, cars parked neatly in driveways. Nothing seemed out of place. But inside one home on Saratoga Trail, the illusion of peace was about to collapse forever. Later, in a quiet interview room under the hum of fluorescent light, he would say just 12 words that still haunt investigators to this day: I could just never really be myself, be who I was before I met her. It was said without emotion, almost as if he were describing the weather. But behind that sentence was an entire story, a story of identity slipping through the cracks of routine, of a man who played the role of a husband so long that he forgot who he really was. This story isn't about the night everything ended. It's about the years that made it possible. It's about how love can turn into performance, how happiness can become proof instead of truth. And how, in the quiet corners of a perfect-looking life, something began to die long before anyone realized it. By all accounts, the Watts family seemed blessed. Shanann's social media radiated positivity, smiling family photos, heartfelt posts about gratitude, her husband, and their 2 little girls, Bella and Celeste. Their home was modern, spotless, and full of light. Friends saw them as a model couple, hardworking and deeply in love. But somewhere behind those bright digital frames, something was changing. His silence was growing. Her hope was stretching thin. And the more they smiled for the world, the further apart they became from each other. The truth of this case is that nothing truly hides forever. Every photo, every post, every message leaves a trace of what's real. And when investigators began following those traces, they found not one story, but 2. One lived for the camera, and one lived in the shadows. Before we continue, if stories like this make you think, if they remind you how fragile life can be behind closed doors, take a moment to subscribe. Share this video with someone who follows true crime closely. Tell us where you're watching from in the comments below. Your support helps us uncover the truths that hide behind appearances, and bring forward the human stories that deserve to be told. Thank you for being here, for listening, and for keeping real storytelling alive. Now, let's begin. It was the middle of July 2018, just a few weeks before everything that looked stable would fall apart. Frederick, Colorado, lay under a still blue sky that summer. The lawns along Saratoga Trail were trimmed, children played in driveways, and families went about their quiet routines. To anyone looking from the outside, the Watts family fit perfectly into that picture. They had the kind of life that seemed planned to the last detail: a beautiful house, steady jobs, 2 healthy daughters, and a baby boy on the way. Every photo of them told the same story: smiling faces, laughter, sunlight pouring through wide windows. But if you looked closely, the smiles were rehearsed. The laughter came a second too late. Something in their story was already beginning to fade. Shanann Watts believed in structure, positivity, and hard work. She was a mother of 2, pregnant with a 3rd, and proudly self-made. She had turned her health challenges into motivation, built a wellness business from her phone, and posted her life openly on Facebook. Friends called her strong, unstoppable, a natural leader. To Shanann, sharing her world online was a way to stay connected, to show gratitude, to celebrate love, to inspire others. But over time, those daily posts became something else. A record of a woman trying to convince herself that everything was still okay. Every caption, every smiling selfie, was part of a routine that made her feel safe, even when she could sense the distance growing. Her husband, Chris Watts, was quieter. Reserved, polite, the kind of man who blended easily into the background. His co-workers said he was dependable, his neighbors called him friendly. But in every video Shanann filmed, he appeared almost hesitant, his eyes flickering toward the camera, his smile stiff, his words brief. The contrast between them couldn't be clearer: she was the voice, he was the silence. At first, that silence seemed harmless, the way opposites often balance in a marriage. But by the summer of 2018, it had become something else. Shanann would later tell friends that he seemed far away, that conversations had turned into one-word exchanges. "He's not himself," she texted a friend. "I don't know what's going on, but I feel like I'm losing him." On social media, however, everything still looked perfect. Her followers saw the highlight reel: birthday celebrations, vacation photos, surprise gifts, and the occasional video of Chris carrying one of their daughters or cooking in the kitchen. "I'm so lucky," Shanann wrote that May, posting a smiling picture of the 2 of them. "He's my rock." The likes came pouring in, thousands of hearts from friends and strangers alike. But behind those words, Shanann was trying to hold a marriage together that had already begun to crack. She was determined, loving, forgiving, and alone in ways she couldn't admit publicly. Friends later described Shanann as someone who believed problems could always be fixed. She planned everything, right down to family schedules and daily affirmations. Control made her feel safe. But control is hard to keep when you're the only one trying. Her business trips were taking her away from home more often, and her pregnancy was wearing her down. Yet she continued smiling for the camera, believing that positivity could somehow heal what had gone cold. "Marriage isn't easy," she wrote in one of her final posts. "But I'm grateful for this man." What she didn't know was that while she was trying to rebuild, Chris was slowly erasing. He had started spending more time at the gym. He changed his diet, his clothes, his playlists. He said he wanted to get in shape, but there was something deeper. He was rebuilding himself from the outside in. Investigators would later find internet searches showing that around this time, Chris began looking up topics about starting a new life. He stopped taking family photos. He deleted old messages. He even changed his phone password. His co-workers noticed a difference. He seemed more confident, one said. Like he had something going on that made him feel alive again. The Watts household, always filled with noise and energy, had grown quieter. Shanann's cheerful voice filled the halls through her phone videos, but Chris's replies were faint. He began avoiding her calls when she was away. He told her he was tired, that work had been long, that the girls needed early bedtimes. In reality, he was spending those evenings building a secret relationship that gave him a sense of control he no longer felt at home. When he texted Shanann, "Love you," it had become habit, not truth. By late July, Shanann's optimism had begun to crumble. She confided in her friends more often, sending them screenshots of messages that felt wrong. "He's cold," she wrote to one. "I can't read him anymore." She told another, "He barely touches me. I keep asking if I did something." Her friends comforted her, telling her marriage goes through seasons, that maybe it was stress. But she knew it was more than that. She was sensing a void growing in her own home, an absence that no amount of positivity could fill. Meanwhile, Chris had mastered the art of pretending. He smiled at neighbors, helped with yard work, attended family events, and kept his tone measured and calm. But beneath the quiet, his thoughts had drifted far from the people who loved him. He no longer saw himself as a husband or father. He saw himself as trapped, cornered by expectations he didn't know how to meet. His phone became his escape, a portal into a different version of himself. When detectives later analyzed his digital data, they found that his search history from July 2018 was filled with fitness plans, love songs, and deleted photos of himself. They also found hidden messages, new contacts, and location pings that matched secret meetups. But at the time, no one suspected anything. He was still the same polite, reserved neighbor who waved while taking out the trash. Shanann noticed his emotional distance but didn't give up. She believed love could still bring him back. Before leaving for her business trip in late July, she sent him a message that read, "I know we've been off lately, but I love you more than you know. We'll figure it out." His reply came hours later, "I love you too." Just 4 words, sent without conviction. Psychologists later called this period the quiet unmaking, the stage when one partner emotionally exits the marriage while the other clings harder. It's the moment before truth becomes visible, when everything looks calm but the foundation is already breaking. Chris had begun separating himself from the life he built, piece by piece, until all that was left was the image of a man he no longer wanted to be. On August 9, 2018, Shanann posted her final Facebook video. Her smile was bright, her tone confident, but her eyes looked tired. Behind her were toys, sunlight, and the echoes of a family that still existed in name only. It was her last recorded moment of normalcy, shared with a world that thought she had it all. No one scrolling past that video could have known that within days, the family they admired would disappear. But if you look back now, if you pause that footage, you can almost see it, the tension in his eyes, the gap between them, the performance of love that had replaced the real thing. The illusion was still holding, but barely. And as every perfect post, every smiling photo, and every shared caption built their story higher, the cracks beneath were already spreading. Because when a life becomes performance, it only takes one truth to make the entire act collapse. It was the end of July 2018, and Chris Watts was changing faster than anyone around him could understand. His co-workers at Anadarko Petroleum noticed first. He was quieter than usual, but strangely upbeat. He smiled more, joked more, and started wearing cologne to work. He had always been steady, the kind of man who followed the rules, but now he was different, almost unrecognizable. When asked about the change, he told one of them, "I've been working on myself." What he didn't say was that he had already built a second life, one hidden behind deleted messages, new playlists, and a woman who believed she had met a single man finally finding himself again. Her name was Nicole Kessinger. She worked in the environmental department at the same company. They met in early June when she stopped by his office, and he mentioned he had 2 daughters. He didn't tell her he had a wife who was 15 weeks pregnant. They began talking regularly, sharing small jokes, and by late June, it had turned into something more. Investigators later found that their first long phone calls lasted over 2 hours. Within weeks, they were texting constantly, sending photos, and meeting outside of work. She described him later as soft-spoken, thoughtful, gentle. He told her he was in the final stages of separating, that he and Shannon were living apart emotionally. It was a lie she had no reason not to believe. By early July, they were seeing each other several times a week. They watched movies, cooked meals, and talked about the future. Chris told her he wanted a fresh start, that he was tired of feeling trapped. "I feel like I can finally breathe again," he texted her one night. Nicole replied, "You seem lighter. Happier." He answered, "I am. I've never felt this alive." Those words, later recovered from his deleted text history, marked a turning point. It was the language of someone convincing himself that a fantasy was real. At home, Shannon was beginning to feel that same distance like a weight pressing on her chest. During her trip to North Carolina that July, she messaged him constantly, long paragraphs about love, their children, their future. His responses were short, mechanical. She begged him to talk. "I feel like something's changed," she texted on July 24, "If there's someone else, just tell me." He replied, "There isn't. I just need time." She didn't believe him, but she wanted to. For her, love was something you worked for. For him, it had already become something to escape from. That same week, Chris and Nicole spent hours on the phone, their calls stretching late into the night. When Shannon was asleep, he whispered to Nicole about moving in together, about taking trips, about the kind of simple life he said he'd always wanted. He showed her pictures of his daughters, telling her how much he loved them, but his tone, she recalled later, was detached, like someone talking about another life entirely. He even told her he was looking forward to a future where everything was quiet. It was the first sign that his definition of peace had turned into something chilling. Investigators would later find that during those weeks, Chris began searching online for how to start a new life and divorce without child support. His phone data showed deleted browser caches, hidden photo folders, and messages that had been erased minutes after they were sent. He even looked up the lyrics to love songs about leaving everything behind. The duality of his life had become complete, loving father by day, secret boyfriend by night. Shannon's messages grew more desperate as his silence deepened. "I don't understand who you are anymore," she wrote on August 4, "You won't even look at me." He told her he was tired, that the girls were fine, that they'd talk soon. But he wasn't planning a conversation, he was planning an ending. On August 9, she posted a final Facebook update thanking friends for their support and talking about how excited she was to bring a baby boy into the world. Her words radiated hope. His, in contrast, had become empty echoes. Psychologists later described Chris's state of mind as one of identity fragmentation. He wasn't angry or impulsive, he was emotionally absent. To those studying the case, his behavior represented what happens when self-denial evolves into delusion. He believed he could erase one version of himself to make another real. He didn't want to live a double life anymore, one investigator later said. He wanted one of them to disappear. On August 10, Nicole texted him, "I wish we could run away and start fresh." He replied, "Soon." That single word, short and final, carried more weight than she could have imagined. While Shannon was still posting about love and gratitude, Chris had already rewritten his story. He wasn't her husband anymore. He was a man rehearsing for a new life that could only begin once the old one ended. It was August 11, 2018. The walls of the Watts home were quiet, the air heavy with tension so thick that even the children sensed it. Shannon had returned from her long trip to North Carolina, where she'd spent weeks feeling Chris's distance through a phone screen. Now she could see it with her own eyes. His tone was colder. His eyes didn't linger. When she reached for him, he froze. That night, she messaged a friend, "Something's off. He hasn't touched me in weeks. I'm scared he doesn't love me anymore." Her friends reassured her, but she already knew. Chris, meanwhile, was lost in a world that no longer included her. While Shannon packed baby clothes and scheduled doctor appointments, he was texting Nicole. They planned future trips, discussed saving money, and talked about getting a small apartment together. She believed he was separated. He told her his marriage had been over for months. Investigators would later recover one of his messages, "We're not compatible anymore. I can't live like this." It was a confession hidden in plain sight, typed while his wife slept in the next room. On August 12, the day before the murders, Chris spent the afternoon with his daughters at home. Bella, 4 years old, and Celeste, 3, played in their room while he texted Nicole about going camping. "You make me feel calm," he wrote. That night, Shannon texted her friend Addie, "He's being distant again. I'm coming home tonight, and I'm going to talk to him." Addie encouraged her to rest. Shannon replied, "I just need to fix this. I always fix things." It would be her final message. At 1:48 a.m. on August 13, Shannon's friend Nicole dropped her off at home. Security cameras captured her stepping inside, tired but hopeful. Chris was already awake. What happened next would never be fully known, but by morning, the family was gone. When Nicole couldn't reach Shannon the next day, she grew alarmed. Shannon had missed a doctor's appointment and wasn't answering calls. By 1:40 p.m., police were at the house for a welfare check. They found her purse, keys, and phone inside. Her car, with the children's car seats, sat untouched in the garage. Chris arrived minutes later, calm, polite, claiming Shannon had left with the kids after an emotional conversation. His tone was flat. His story, unconvincing. Neighbors provided footage showing Chris backing his work truck into the driveway early that morning, something he had never done before. The moment he realized they had video, his face changed. He folded his arms, swayed on his feet, and tried to act normal. When he left, the neighbor quietly told police, "Something's not right with him." Within 24 hours, Chris was the focus of the investigation. His phone data didn't match his story. His text history showed deception. And when he failed a polygraph test, the truth began to surface. Alone in the interrogation room, he told detectives, "I didn't mean for any of this to happen. But it had." Every quiet moment, every deleted message, every lie had led to that morning. By the time the sun set on August 13, the perfect family on Saratoga Trail no longer existed. The house still stood, neat and calm, but inside it, the illusion had shattered forever. It was August 15, 2018, when the truth began to surface. After 2 days of interviews, inconsistencies, and lies, investigators were running out of patience, and Chris Watts was running out of stories. He sat in a small gray interrogation room, arms folded, speaking in circles. "I just want them back," he said. His voice trembled, but his eyes didn't. Across from him sat FBI agent Tammy Lee, quiet, precise, and relentless. She studied his tone, the way his hands stayed perfectly still, the lack of real emotion behind every sentence. When the polygraph test ended, she leaned forward and said, "You know you failed that test, right? There's no way you didn't know what happened." For the first time, he fell silent. The mask began to slip. He asked for his father, Ronnie, who had flown in that morning. When Ronnie entered the room, the scene turned heartbreaking. Chris's shoulders hunched, his voice dropped to a whisper. "Dad," he said, "I told her I wanted to separate, and then she hurt the girls, and then I lost it." His father looked confused, frozen in disbelief. It was a lie, his first attempt to shift the blame. But the moment was recorded, and detectives knew they were close. That night, faced with mounting evidence, Chris finally broke. His phone data, truck GPS logs, and cell tower pings had already told investigators where to look. Before sunrise on August 16, police drove to a remote oil site owned by Anadarko Petroleum, an isolated field nearly 40 miles from his home. The earth there was quiet, undisturbed, except for the faint scent of oil and the sound of wind. It was there that they found what he had tried to hide, Shannon buried in a shallow grave, and nearby, the oil tanks that held the bodies of Bella and Celeste. Even hardened investigators wept. When confronted with the discovery, Chris's calm cracked. His voice faltered, his hands shook. "I didn't know what else to do," he said. "I just wanted it all to stop." But his words explained nothing. He couldn't give a reason because there wasn't one that made sense. Psychologists who later studied his confession described it as a mix of control, detachment, and shame, a man so desperate to erase his reality that he mistook destruction for freedom. In November 2018, he pleaded guilty to 9 counts, avoiding the death penalty in exchange for multiple life sentences without parole. During sentencing, the courtroom was silent except for the sound of his voice saying, "I'm sorry." Shannon's parents, Frank and Sandra Rzusek, stood as her father spoke through tears, "We loved you like a son. We trusted you." The judge looked directly at Chris and said, "The most inhumane and heartless crime I've handled in my career." Even after his conviction, questions lingered. Why didn't he stop? How could a man who tucked his children into bed at night turn around and destroy the very life he built? In prison interviews later that year, Chris tried to explain. "I thought if I ended everything, it would be easier," he said. "I was scared to lose control." He described the murders in detail, but there was no rage in his voice, only emptiness. He said he still saw their faces every night. When the recordings ended, investigators agreed on one thing: this was not a crime of sudden anger. It was the result of a slow, quiet collapse, a man who built a life that looked perfect on the outside but hollowed himself out from within. The case would haunt everyone who touched it, not just for its brutality, but for the unbearable calm that surrounded it. The story of the Watts family became a warning. A reminder that evil doesn't always announce itself with fury. Sometimes it arrives in silence, in the quiet spaces between smiles, and in the moments when no one is watching. In the years that followed, the Watts case became more than a tragedy, it became a mirror. People saw themselves in it, the marriages strained by silence, the curated smiles on social media, the quiet loneliness hidden behind perfect lives. Every Facebook post, every video Shannon shared, now looked different. What once seemed like joy now felt like a desperate effort to hold a family together. And what once looked like calm in Chris's face revealed itself as the absence of anything at all. Even behind bars, Chris remained disturbingly ordinary. In interviews from prison, he spoke softly, still calling Shannon amazing, still describing his daughters as angels. When asked why, his answer was always the same: "I thought I could fix everything." But fixing, for him, had meant erasing. There was no explanation that could ever make sense, no reason that could fit the scale of what he did. Psychologists said it best: he wasn't consumed by rage, but by detachment. He didn't explode, he disconnected. For Shannon's family, there would be no closure, only endurance. They built foundations in her name, speaking openly about domestic abuse and the quiet red flags that too often go unnoticed. They wanted the world to remember her not for how she died, but for how she lived, with hope, faith, and love. And that's what this story leaves us with. A reminder that real evil can look ordinary, that danger can wear a smile, and that sometimes the most chilling words aren't shouted in anger, but whispered in confession. If you've made it this far, thank you for listening to this story. Like, share, and subscribe to help keep true storytelling alive. Tell us where you're watching from in the comments below, and remember, behind every perfect picture, there's always more than what we see.